And when we hear of humanitarian aid or foreign aid, we are looking at it from, it spans in different areas. It's diversified, and the more the aid is diversified, the more the influence is also diversified over African nations. So we've been seeing aid coming in for military assistance, military training, military support in the name of fighting against Boko Haram or Islamic insurgency in different parts of Africa. We've seen aid coming in from IMF in the forms of grants. We see the USAID providing fundings for countries. We see UNICEF coming in with its own initiatives. We see China coming in with loans, Oxfam, World Vision, and all of these countries that keep coming in with aid. And so even in the level of the financial institution, and it even goes as far as going into our very cultures in the African continent. And when you look at what this philanthropy has done in Africa, we'll see that for more than 60 years, we've been receiving aid from developed countries or from these financial institutions that we've mentioned. But there's been no change in Africa. It continues to deepen the debt level of African countries to the World Bank and IMF. It continues to create a crisis within the country. The economy remains the same. There is a lot of corruption. There is a lot of poverty that they were saying they're coming in to alleviate poverty. So in a nutshell, has foreign aid been more like a curse or a blessing to the African continent, Mr. Chairman? And expatiate as much as you can.
Thank you very much for that very pertinent question. In a nutshell, or on its broad basis, aid has really not helped. Aid is always very important. Aid in terms of when let's take, for example, a country has a huge natural disaster. In the immediate aftermath of that event, it could really make a difference in the lives of the people that are impacted. But overall, we would break down this in a significant amount of details. It is essential that we all understand that there are many ways of control that the colonialists, the empire, the imperialists has used to influence the various aspects of society. When we started this conversation, I made reference to the history and the culture of the imperialists and what they sought to accomplish. It has never been about the interest. Sorry, let me put it this way. It has never been about any kind of social regards for the individuals that resides in, especially these countries of the South. It's always been about a game of interest. And in seeking that interest, then these imperialist powers or these colonial powers, I should use the word colonial since we're talking about neocolonialism in this case.
Yeah.
It's always been about the interest of the colonialists. So as the world evolved from the 18th, 17th century or starting the 16th century format of slavery and went towards another format where individuals were paid for their labor, and in most cases almost like for nothing, pretty much in order to create this wealth for the imperialists that are there. This move to transform itself to a format where they would come over in your countries and then provide you with, let's start with agriculture, for example.
Right.
If they wanted to kill your agricultural base, they basically would flood. If you were a major rice producer, they basically would flood your economy. The government of those countries will, in effect, provide stipends or some form of funding for the farmers of the country in order to bring down their prices. Let's take, for example, I was trying to avoid using specific countries, but if we say the United States would give funding to its farmers farmers would then produce this rice, and because they receive all of that additional funding, the rice would basically be for almost for free, and they would dump this rice in developing countries or the specific countries where the rice industry is targeted to be killed, to be destroyed. And so it will be cheaper to buy this rice that comes in the form of aid than for it. The farmers that in those home countries that are growing their rice will no longer be able to grow that rice, because essentially it will cost them more to grow the rice than just buying this cheap rice that came from in the form of aid from these countries. They can do that for like 4, 5, 6 years until the industry disappears. And so by using all those tools to kill the economies of these countries, then they remain ahead. There have been many tools that have been used, not just the aspect of aid, but let's dwell a little bit around the aid issue. It would not only come in the form of these subsidies, but it equally may come in the form of they send in these individuals, Peace Corps volunteers, and they come in as volunteers. These are individuals that the US may give, say, for example, $50 million as aid to Amazonia, and then that aid goes to these individuals that are like Peace Corps volunteers to provide form of value to the countries that are receiving them. These Peace Corps volunteers may come in as teachers, but most of the time they may show up as having to come in to provide help. These individuals tend to be those that the US government, the State Department will rely on them to provide intelligence to back. So because now they know very deeply, they are going out there right deep into the suburbs. They are interacting with the local population. So they know very deeply on the reports that they provide everything about this society. When they write a report, they can write a report that this whole area has 3 different schools. They have 0 hospitals. So when the US presents its report, or at least they can speak about a country knowing very deeply about the aspects of these countries, just because of the intelligence that are provided by these Peace Corps volunteers that come in as aid. If you look at the way they provided the aid, for example, to a country like Ukraine, this aid comes in the form of weapons, that the money goes to manufacturers of weapons. The weapons then are shipped to Ukraine for Ukraine to use those weapons, and they call it aid. But at the end of the day, all of the money had stayed within the United States. So it was generally not aid. It went to the manufacturers of the weapons, and then and so on and so forth, and was shipped to Ukraine. As we go on, there's a lot more to cover on this topic, but I want to take a moment here and allow you to come in.
Exactly. And that is, you've really given a broad-based, detailed explanation on what, for our audience to really have an understanding of what we are going to be discussing today. And let us try to break it down in different aspects, political, economic, cultural, like you came in with, and the social aspect of it, because we've also seen how this foreign aid coming in. Let's look at it at the political point of view. We've seen how the World Bank, USA, China, and other IMF, because we know like the World Bank is for the American control, dominates, and then the IMF is a European kind of like dominated part. And when they come in with this aid to different African countries, and we've seen this play in countries like Kenya, we've seen it play in countries like Ghana, we've seen it play in countries like Nigeria, even Cameroon itself, that when they send in this aid, now they begin to influence the policy of those countries, because they have to dance to their own tune. So as an expert in this field, and over the years as you have studied this aspect of foreign aid to the African continent, how can we, just give me a second there now. So how can we argue that a foreign aid, which initially was supposed to be to help the countries grow has rather led to a circle of dependency that African leaders now believe that they cannot do anything without truly depending on this foreign aid. And it has not only led to dependency on the Western powers, but it has also led to dependency at the level of decision making at the governance of that country. How has this been of any help to Africa, and how can we say foreign aid came into Africa as a form of help that has rather led to de-Africanization or devaluing or dependency in Africa? I don't know if you get what I was trying to put in there.
Right. I think that is a good way of looking at these things. For our audience to be able to understand what is generally referred to as aid, the US has an educational system whereby when students graduate from high school, they then, most of the time, because college and universities tend to be very expensive, they then take what they call financial aid, which allows them to be able to go to college or to university. Now, that financial aid comes in two forms. The first one being actual loans that are provided, and those loans, remember the word here, financial aid. So basically, the reason they call it aid is because they are making it possible for you to take a loan without necessarily, as a high school graduate, without necessarily having any form of collateral or any form of other assets to be able to go to university. Nevertheless, even though it's called financial aid, is still a loan in which you're taking that money, it goes towards the payment of school fees and any of the related expenses. And then upon graduation, or upon if you fail to graduate or just stepped away from your studies, then you begin paying that debt back after 6 months. Now, there's another form of student aid that comes in the form of actual aid, which is reserved for certain categories of individuals. But obviously strings attached. The reason I use that background is for us to understand that when these things are called aid packages, they really are not. It's not grant. It's not specifically all grant money. It's actually a combination of very little grants and then loans that maybe otherwise that country which is in financial distress would not have been able to get. And a lot of times the way that in the advent of the change in the financial system around 1970s to the Bretton Woods system, America gained control. At that point, most of the countries were in economic shambles. So America gained control of the IMF and the World Bank. So like you said, comrade, these institutions became under their control. So as part of the extension of the control of other countries, they then structure it in such a way that in the event of the extension of these financial packages, it is mostly used in running America's foreign policy than anything else. So if we take the case of Kenya, for example, where Kenya got into the position of having taken all this debt in order to support its growth. So they got into a place where this debt was becoming due. It started to constitute over 70% of the gross national product of the country.
Right.
So they had to look for ways to get the payments of not just interest, but of principal, starting to principal reduction and not just interest. So they went on, the way that they went about doing it is therefore to just about tax any and everything. So, but when these loans come into these countries, the way that it tends to be structured, sometimes you talked about earlier on, comrade, about structural adjustment program. They present it in such a language that a listener, someone that is not aware of, when you hear about a structural adjustment program, it gives the impression that the structure, the economic structure, the political structure, the social structure of an entire country's system was not in a good place. So they recommended that in order for you to be able to afford the interest and principal payment of this loan, this is what you could do. And part of what you could do is to privatize all of the industries major industries that are in that, especially strategic industries that are in that country.
Right.
If we move away from Kenya, for example, if you take another country that is very highly natural resource endowed, they come in, they require you to privatize. So the US, because it had taken, it was leading in a lot of this from industrialization historically, so it had developed its economic base. You have one country like, in order to make this point, it's good to understand. Take Google, for example. Google provides the search engine for most of the countries in the West.
Yeah.
And not just in the West, they are now in control of all of the search mechanism in almost most countries, except in this case countries of Asia like China and Russia, which have their own specific, but there are reasons for that. So now they created these oil companies, major oil companies, without specifically naming them. So when they come in with a structural adjustment program, part of it is privatize these strategic industries, and then they bring in these single companies that are controlling most of that industry that are owned by them. The colonialists, they come in, they buy into that control of that industry. Say the oil company may be taken, in this case, by Shell or BP or ExxonMobil and so on and so forth. And then if you take the case of La République du Cameroon, they brought in the company that would control their was that electricity or water? I think it was electricity system, and was privatized, bought by a foreign company. And what they essentially did, they never invested into trying to modernizing the supply line, electrical supply grid for the electricity, or improving upon them and expanding in the power supply to try to increase the wattage that they provided to the economy. Instead, they look for ways to significantly or slowly destroy that. And at the end of the day, most of the time now in La République du Cameroon, you barely get a few hours of electricity. And when they do that, part of the intention too is to curb the growth of industrialization. You cannot have major industries in your economic system if you can't provide the power that is needed in those industries. I just use power for example. There are many other aspects of the industry that they come in, the privatization picks up. So that is one of the things that it does. I can continue going here, but I wanted to make sure that it didn't have before.
Exactly. No, it's fine.